Today we're gonna be introducing to you a fireside chat, which is something different than what we usually do, and we thought that this is something different for you, and it's something that you will learn a lot by through it. So. Not to get into much detail, I will, as you all know, that as part of BLIX, it's a place that we all have a common passion for inclusion and diversity. And I will be introducing some of our great mentors that we have at BLIX, where you can get to know and book your sessions with. So moving on to the next slide, please. So as you can all know that you can really benefit through various things that we offer at BLIX through our business bites, leadership lessons, inclusive leadership, and the knowledge exchange session. And all of them you're going to be able to find on BLIX website that our incredible team will put for you in the chat box, where you can have access and learn more about it. Moving on, this is just some of the incredible mentors that we have on board, where our team will also be sending you the link where you can book your sessions with them. And also, this all would not really be possible without the incredible team that worked really hard behind the scene to make all this happen and possible for us today. And today we are going to be having Dr. Brown, who is the founding editor and chef and an international journal of the entrepreneurial venturing and a fellow of a Charter Institute of Marketing, who will have a fireside chat with one of the founding mentors at BLIX, who we're really honored to hear finally from him at one of our talks, Carol Osher, who are going to be talking to us about the US election, race in America, and the importance of inclusion. So I'll be passing it to them now, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talk. Down to you, Dr. Brown and Carol.
Excellent. Thank you, Yamna, and thank you, BLIX team, for organizing this. I just want to make sure that we're recording, because this is going to be a very interesting chat with Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, great to have you here. I think we met 14 years ago. I was in Sweden. I'd started the master's program in ITT entrepreneurship, and I was fortunate enough to meet you. And for me, a person of color, it was amazing to see a leader like me in this faraway land who was representing entrepreneurship. And that's really very much what the community is about. We're leaders from all different diverse backgrounds and experiences, and we're trying to demonstrate that there are leaders of different types and different colors. So for me, that 14 years ago, that kind of really shaped the course of my life. One of the best university programs I've been to, so thank you for that. Where we are now is we've got a community of mentors, and I thought it would be excellent to really share some of the wisdoms and the insights that I've learned from you, specifically about a very topical subject right now, the US elections, race in America, and the importance of inclusion. So with that, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much. Am I in frame? I can't see myself. Is my head cut off? Or
You're looking great. You're looking great.
Okay, with my COVID beard here.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that thank you very much for having me, and I was honored that you tapped me on the shoulder and said that you had this project that you were involved in, and I was glad to help if I can at all. So I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. So let's jump right in. So 2020, what a year! We've had COVID. We've had a racial awakening. I think a moment that really sticks with everybody was pretty much the lynching of George Floyd. For the community, it was a moment where we turned outrage into whatever action we could, which was setting up this mentorship community. As an African American, as a person of color, how did that affect you?
Well, I think it affected me in a number of different ways, but I think the most important thing coming out of this was an opportunity to see and for the majority community to see some of the things that the minority community goes through on a regular basis. I mean, we had the Rodney King beating now, I guess, almost 30 years ago, and that was televised, and there was outrage there because it was televised, other people could see it. And while we could say these things were going on, it's much different to see it. And in fact, if you go back even to the civil rights movement, to Gandhi, and then later on in the 60s to Martin Luther King and others, part of the strategy was to make it visceral and visible by having it televised. It's one thing to hear that people were being beaten and dogs were put on them and they were getting hosed and whatnot. It's another thing to see it live on TV. And so the actions of this summer, because of the widespread use of mobile phone technology, video camera, and that sort of thing, it again just made more visible the things that were going on, and there was no opportunity for people to deny what was going on. Without seeing it, you'd say, well, he did this, he was a bad guy, he started it, and blah blah blah. This was an opportunity to see all from start to finish, and I think that was what really triggered the summer of protest and leading into this new era of the civil rights struggle.
Yeah, you make a very important point. These things have been happening probably more often than we know about, but for the first time, they're being recorded. So it was an opportunity for people who had never seen this, who could turn away, who could bury their heads in the sand. It was unequivocal. They couldn't turn away anymore. And I think what that led to was people of all different colors from different communities saying, okay, enough is enough. We can't turn away anymore. And despite it being so harrowing, such a tragedy, in some ways it presented hope. What you saw this summer in the US and across the globe was this movement that has never happened before at such scale, where people from different colors and different communities were out in the streets and marching. So from this incident, what elements of hope do you see? What positives do you take despite the tragedy?
We're talking about hope already. I think I would say this. I would say that the surprising element to me in this was how widespread globally this was. Here, even in Stockholm, there were protests in the street. And unfortunately, my daughter was able to take part in a civil rights march in 2020 in the middle of Stockholm, and I think that's tragic. That's not hope. It is hope on one hand. It's a tragedy on the other. But I think that this generation, and I don't know what generation you want to call it, X, Y, Z, PDQ, I don't know, but the young people here, I think. See this as outrageous, and they believe, how can this actually occur in this time frame? And so the hope, then again, getting back to the hope, there is hope. I think that the younger generation sees this as unacceptable, and I think that as we go in the future, I think there's an opportunity perhaps for some real change. But it won't change until this generation actually gets the power that the older generation is clinging on to, and we can talk about that throughout the afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking about this generation and getting power, I think you're right. There is a new awakening, and there's a new sense of inclusive leadership. The U.S. election, fortunately, demonstrated that this year. So what we saw was a polarized America. On one hand, Trump got more votes than he's ever received before. And on the other hand, you have Biden and Kamala Harris, who've received the highest number of votes ever. Is this sort of how do you make sense of that? You have this country that is so opposed to each other. You've seen this big racial awakening. and then you've got the biggest votes for Trump ever and the highest votes ever for the first ever VP of color. It seems like such a paradox.
In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy was running for president, and they asked him at that time, did he foresee a time where there would ever be a black president? And he said that 40 years, he said, 40 years into the future, I believe there'll be an opportunity to have a black president. And president he was, because 40 years to the year, in 2008, Obama was elected. Now, while most people see that as a signal, a sea change in race relations in the U.S., there was a problem. And the problem was that individuals, you, me, individuals can do well. And we can be exceptions. We can be CEOs. We can be billionaires. We can be vice presidents. We can be senators. We can be presidents. But that one exception does not mean that the rest of the group is having success. And what it did more than anything else was a signal to those that had power, and we're talking about old white men, basically, that their time was coming to an end soon. And so what that did was lit a fire under them to try to do whatever they could to prevent this change from happening. And one of the first things we saw before he even took office, during the transition time, which of course we're having issues with now, but during the transition between Bush and Obama, was that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell came out and said that he was going to make Obama a one-term president, and everything that he tried to turn into law, he was going to block. And that was even before he even took office, before he even became president. He was going to try to block everything. So what happened was, as a result, of course, of this election as well, this is where Trumpism started to grow as well, because this is when the birther movement came in. And so his election, Obama, triggered what's going on now with the rise of the Trumpism. You can't call it the Republican Party. It's a movement around him.
Yes, and we see that today. We saw that with the election. There was things like voter suppression in minority neighborhoods. There's things like gerrymandering, which effectively tries to prevent the vote going to minorities and people of color. And to your point earlier, the sea is starting to change. People are no longer looking away, and the new generation want to vote for a more inclusive leader like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, but they're being prevented from all the reasons you just described.
One thing related to that was, if you remember, I guess now 2 or 3 Saturdays ago, when the major network called it for Biden, and there was an expression in the streets of people celebrating that they had won and defeated Trump and whatnot. And I thought it's okay to blow off some steam and be excited about this, but it went a little too far, in my opinion. And let me tell you why. Because as you mentioned, okay, while Biden has received more votes than anyone, and I'll get back to that in a second, Trump got 73 million votes. The election was relatively close. 72 million people. So we have a divided country. And just because Biden is going to come in, those 72 million people aren't going anywhere. They're still going to be there. Okay? And again, the press is making a big deal of Biden now having more votes than anyone ever. Okay, well, why is that? Well, the reason is because the country has more people than ever. I mean, that's the reason. It's a reason why no one has ever gotten 79 million or 80 million. That's because the country didn't have that many people. So they're trying to make it seem as this was such a swell of public support, and it really is not, and it's problematic. And what's interesting too is, during this election there were things that happened. Was this? I have it here. I want to do. Yes, Alabama. Okay, so the voters of Alabama voted to eliminate the racist language in their constitution. Okay, so they voted to eliminate the racist comments, and they voted. Was it 68% of the population voted to eliminate the racist language? Okay, at the same time, that same day, Utah, as well as Nebraska, voted to eliminate slavery. While slavery is outlawed federally, some states still have slavery on the books, and Nebraska and Utah had it. And the Nebraskan citizens voted 68% to eliminate slavery, and the Utah citizens voted 83%. Okay, so we have 68% in Alabama, 83% in Utah, and 68% in Nebraska. Does anybody see a problem here?
Why isn't it 100%?
Exactly. Why isn't it 100%? We have 30% of the population in saying that slavery is okay. We have 30% of the population, more than 30%, saying that it's okay to have slavery in the racist language in the Constitution. There's something wrong here. It's going to take more than just one presidential cycle to get this out of the system. It just because one person has been elected does not mean that all of this 500 years worth of embedded feelings that have been then translated into law and then been translated into institutional structures is going to go away. It's not going to happen.
And why do you believe why it's unfathomable for most people? I hope, well, the majority of people, it's unfathomable that people would vote for slavery effectively and allow this racist language to stay. How can that happen in today's society?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the heads of those folks. That's because that's a scary place to be in the heads of a race. But I will say this is something very closely related. Why do 70% of Republicans this week, 70% of Republicans believe that Trump won the election?
My take is they don't believe it, but they just want to be obstructive.
I don't know. Does it matter what you believe or what you do in your actions?
Well, in a world of fake news, people are living in their own bubbles, and within their bubble, they're taking information from sites that aren't your CNNs and your authoritative news channels. They're getting it on Facebook, they're getting it on Twitter, and they're coming from these places like InfoWars.
Now, normally I would say you're absolutely correct, but in this case, it's coming from the President of the United States. It's coming from the Vice President of the United States. It's coming from the Senate Majority Leader. It's coming from the Secretary of State.
I think there is a feeling that, as you said earlier, the tide is turning. The majority of the populace are for inclusive leadership. We got to live together, and most people do value diversity and realize we're all from different backgrounds. However, the people in power are seeing their time is coming to an end, and there's a entrenchment almost, where they're saying we're going to retain this power by hook or by crook, to the point where we will change reality so that we retain it. Because if we let it slip now, we could live in a world that, God forbid, is multicultural and everybody's equal.
Absolutely.
And for a lot of people who retain the power, that's a scary place, because people will be equal. We'll have potentially a female president, which is a scary place for a lot of people from a certain cohort. But just on that point, you've got two 18-year-old daughters of mixed heritage. For them to see Kamala Harris take the highest office a female has ever taken, you could say in the world, because pretty much the US is the leading nation. What does that mean to them? Have they shared their feelings on that?
Yeah, basically it means nothing. And the reason it means nothing is because they live in Sweden and live in a world where, of course, this could happen. Their experience is a Swedish experience and not a U.S. experience. Their experience is a European experience, not a U.S. Experience. So the fact that Kamala Harris is going to be vice president, and so that's what it actually means to them. In terms of they can never be president of the United States because they were born here. So it doesn't mean that they could aspire to be. It has it doesn't register at all.
So for them, it's a default, and you see the Nordic nations are probably one of the most gender equal. But I imagine there's some element there where they see this leader a female leader of mixed heritage, and she's going to be on TV on cycles, and suddenly there's a woman in this position having that much power.
Let me do this. Let me broaden it a little bit and talk about the election of Obama and the fact that he was able to serve 2 terms, 8 years, because the children that were born, or the children that were in school while he was president, didn't know any other president, and they see the president, they think of Obama. That's their normal. Okay, so when she becomes vice president, the children who are in school, who are growing up during this time, see that as normal. And that is a huge thing. Yeah. When you can normalize a woman or normalize a person of color doing something, okay? Watching American football players and the quarterback is black now is not a thing. Okay, it's a huge thing to me, because it was just a few years ago where they said that that black people would never be quarterback because they weren't smart enough. Okay, and now it's on the other side. Everyone's trying to scramble to get a black quarterback because they think they can win or make some money. So it normalizes things, and this normalization is really a good thing. So I think that the point that it might not impact my daughters, it's impacting hundreds of millions of people around the world when they see that this is a normal thing to be. And if I can't be necessarily president of the United States, I could perhaps be the president of India or some other or Pakistan, who are places, of course, that have already had female leaders.
And just on that point, if you look at the COVID crisis handling, the countries with the best response and the lowest COVID cases all have female leaders: Iceland, New Zealand, South Korea. So they're definitely doing something right. Maybe it's
I posted something about that months ago, that all the places that had the lowest COVID were all run by women.
Exactly. So just getting on this. So you said it's normalizing, which is fantastic, right? So people can see themselves, people of color, female potential leaders can say, I can be like that lady in the White House. Equally, there's a dichotomy, because what you have is somebody like Donald Trump, who looks at a racist rally and says there's good people on both sides, who pretty much is obsequious to the Proud Boys and white supremacy. They watch that on TV as well, and this is getting mainstream media attention. How does that compute?
Well, I hope that this 4 years is seen as an aberration rather than the normal way to be, and we get back to a place very quickly. So this kind of nightmarish 4 years can be forgotten. The problem, unfortunately, is that this 4 years, and I really, really believe that this has been a government by distraction. While Trump is out tweeting 50 times a day and causing disruption and whatnot over here, the people who are actually running the government are rolling back regulations. They're changing the rules. They are giving away the store. They're doing all of these things in the dark, okay? And it will come out. It might not even come out January 21st. It may take years for it to come out to see what really they did. And while some things can be reversed with a presidential executive order on the 20th, okay, many things are going to take years and years, if ever, to be able to come back. If you say people can drill in the Arctic, and they start drilling in the Arctic, okay, and they drill for an hour, okay, and you make them stop, it's too late. It's too late. So yeah, so the damage is done. And then there's of course the level of damage it has done to the American reputation globally, and it's problematic because we had, rightly or wrongly, and I could argue both ways, and I think that it's not a yes or yes or no or black or white kind of situation. Is that we had military might, which we still do, but we also had some level of moral authority, and I think that has gone away, and that might not be able to get that back. I mean, how can you send a bunch of election observers to South Sudan to see if they're running their election properly when we have this stuff going on here? It just you know,
it's a very important
it's a problem.
Absolutely.
It's a problem.
That credibility and the credence that the US had as benevolent ruler of the free world effectively has been diminished so badly. So there's so much damage that the Trump administration has done. Where does Joe Biden and Kamala Harris start? They've got an uphill battle. What can they do to bring the nation together?
Well, I think that by getting back on the traditional president-vice president track will do a lot. You know, speaking in complete sentences is going to help to start with. Being able to spell is going to help. Okay, so these small things will go a long way, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's a collective sense, not as an American citizen, but as a citizen of the world, that we can just ignore the tweets, just relax. The heightened anxiety just diminishes, and we can get back to getting everybody working together.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that, you know, in the past, you know, prior to these last 4 years, you didn't wake up in the morning and think, what did the president do today? You woke up in the morning and went along your own work, knowing that stuff was happening. Okay, the last 4 years, you wake up and it's, what did Trump do today? And that anxiety is stressful for the nation and the world, because you don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen now between now and the 20th. Is there going to be a war in Iran? Is there going to be a war in North Korea? We still don't know what's going to happen. And so that bringing the level of tension and anxiety in the U.S. and worldwide is going to be significantly helpful.
And I think particularly for people of color, the Trump presidency and administration, they made it very clear whose side they were on, and they very much stoked the flames of white supremacy, which was difficult. And I think for a lot of people of color, they felt that they were being excluded somewhat. He emboldened police officers. He'd say, throw them in the car, be more violent, be more rough. Question, do you think the lynching of George Floyd would have happened on a different president's watch? Or did that police officer feel that, well, if the president can say these things and embolden people, I feel protected?
Well, the quick answer is, yeah, of course. Because we just said that it happens on a daily basis, just people haven't seen it. It's been happening for hundreds of years. Okay, but the point that you make is a very good one, and I actually believe that is that the environment that was created during the last 4 years emboldened the evildoers. Emboldened the evildoers to say that we can say these things now, out loud, and we can do things that we only thought about in the past because we have backup. We have backup, and so the problem is that now they're losing their backup. Okay, but they're not changing their views. These police officers are not they're not disappearing. These judges are not disappearing. So all of these people will still have the same views. Now, they may be a little bit less bold, okay, but they will still insidiously get their way in certain actions that they do over time. So so again, this is a long process. We didn't get here in 4 years, and it's not going to be fixed in 4 years.
Yeah, no, good points. It's going to change tack a little bit. You mentioned earlier that the situation in Europe is a lot better than the situation in the US in terms of politics and race relations. I definitely echo that sentiment. However, I think there are definitely challenges. There's discrimination. There's a lack of leaders of color. You give the example of sports. Overwhelmingly, the most successful sports stars in the US and in Europe, a lot of them are people of color. But if you look at the management levels, you don't have that leadership. You don't have female leadership. You don't have leadership of color. So that's a big problem. And how do we tackle that? Is it about the people at the top saying we're going to make diversity and inclusion quotas, or is it about this bottom-up groundswell movement, or both?
Yeah, I actually didn't say it was better in Europe.
Less bad.
Yeah, I would say that it's different. It's different because the history in Europe is a colonial history, while the history in the U.S. is one of slavery and being a colony. So it's quite a bit. It's quite a bit different. But to move on from the point is that it's who's pulling the strings, and it's easy to have people in the front that are generating the revenue and being the face of whatever. But the question is, who's pulling their strings? And this is very much the same. We talk about so Chris Rock, who's a comedian, a U.S. Based comedian, although he has some international fame, has a piece where he talks about the difference between rich and wealthy. Okay, the difference between rich and wealthy. And they said Shaq, the basketball player, was rich. This was while Shaq was playing. The person who wrote his paycheck was wealthy. In that, again, it's how do we break into those levels of management? How do we become one of the puppet masters as opposed to being one of the puppets? And in part, this is what we're trying to do. What you're trying to do with BLIX here is to train and prepare men and women so they can take a greater role, a bigger position, a more powerful position in the organizations that matter in their respective countries. And so the question is, okay, we have a situation that has been unequal and is unequal. Do we just roll over and say, this is too hard, I can't do it? Or do we stand up and try to move ahead? And so the question is, okay, this is the playing field that we've dealt. What do we need to do now? And I think what we should probably spend is a good portion of the rest of the time that we have talking about, okay, these are the cards we've been dealt. Okay, how do we play them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point. And it's something you observe from leaders of color, is that you didn't start with an advantage on the starting line. You're probably further back. If it was a 100-meter sprint, you're probably starting back between the 150 or the 200-meter line. Whether that's not having parents who had wealth, as you said, potentially didn't go to university, third level education, probably the descendants of slaves. The fact that there's discrimination today, there's microaggressions, you're prejudged, you need to be twice as good as the person next to you in order to play in the same field. So that is I guess it's a curse and a blessing. It's a curse in that you got to work so much harder as a person of color or a female leader, because you're not going to be given the same benefit of doubt. However, it builds an amazing resilience and an amazing thick skin, which is critical in being a leader. It's critical in being an entrepreneur. So how can we tap into those advantages, let's say, of those cards that we've been dealt, to use your metaphor?
Yeah, how is the question? I think the first step is recognizing that our experience, okay, can be an advantage. So for the first thing is, instead of being a victim, okay, having a victim mentality, we have to say, okay, success can be obtained. Okay, I have some skills. Okay, how do I make the best of it? We were having a brief chat before, and we're talking about that we can turn our experience into a competitive advantage. First, again, as I said, you have to believe it's the case. But in a environment where innovation and creativity is valued, okay, having a diversity of experience, okay, can be significantly helpful. Okay, and if you are an immigrant in a country, or a country that has a minority group that you're in versus the majority group, we have to be able to migrate from our local culture, the culture that we live in the house, for example, or in our neighborhood. At the same time, we have to be able to move in the circles of the majority as well. And so this kind of bi or multi culturalism, okay, is a tremendous advantage vis-a-vis someone who's very homogeneous, especially with respect to creativity and innovation. If the company, for whatever reason, says, okay, now we need to be more inclusive, we need to be more diverse, okay, and here's now your management team, and the management team is diverse, who's going to be better able to manage those folks? Not even manage. Who's going to be better able to actually just talk to them, be in the same room with them, okay? Folks that have that experience their whole life versus someone who comes from a homogeneous environment, okay? Now, this is not to say that there aren't advantages to being in a homogeneous environment, because I think that this is important to say as well, is that most people, especially those that believe that inclusion and multiculturalism and whatnot is valuable, seem to think that diversity is important and gives you an advantage all the time. So we have an organization, we have a team. If we make it diverse, it's going to do better than the homogeneous team all the time. Okay? And that's not true. It's not true. Okay? It might be sad to say, but it's not true. Why isn't it true? Well, because there's some strengths to homogeneity. To being homogeneous, there's some strengths. Okay? We can communicate quicker and easily because we have a background that's similar. That means we can get down to the project faster. Okay? So in terms of our performance is going to start off quicker, and we're going to be able to move. Now, if the task involves creativity or innovation, now we might suffer a little bit because of this being homogeneous. While a group that is more diverse, okay, may benefit from that diversity in terms of innovation and creativity, but how do you get them to work together? How do you get them to communicate with each other? Okay, coming up with a good idea is one thing, implementing it is another. So we have a problem here. The problem is we may believe, because innovation and creativity is valued these days in organizations, that we should have an innovative team. Okay, that should give us a competitive advantage, but oftentimes it doesn't. Okay, and what happens is the manager is a good guy. The manager is a good guy. He wants to do the best thing. So he puts together this group of women and men and people from all different parts of the world on a team, and he hopes that it works, but it doesn't. And now he's on the limb because he tried to do something good. He tried to take advantage of this diversity, and now he's failed. While the other team or the other company that was more homogeneous is passing them. Okay? How many times is that manager then going to go out on a limb and create a diverse team? He's not, or she's not. Now the question is, well, not the question, the answer, in my opinion, is that we have not developed managers that are good enough to manage diversity. If we can work to identify and train those managers that are good at diversity, then we can take those diverse teams and groups and companies, okay, and despite the challenges we may have with that diversity, use the pluses of that diversity to succeed. So it's not necessarily that it is that it's the diversity that failed. It's just that our ability to manage it failed, and our skills as managers have not progressed to the point where we can do that. So if we can figure out how to manage diversity better, or we can identify those folks, us, who have experience with diversity, and we can just get some additional training to manage that diversity, we're going to be up here while other folks are there. And so then it becomes a true competitive advantage. And so folks need to see that as a possibility, but you also need to, it's a challenge to get kind of corporate America or corporate Europe to really buy that. So of course, one way to do it is to create your own business, do your own thing, and use that as your competitive advantage vis-a-vis the competitors. That's one way. That's one way to do it. But yeah, does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. I have looked at some research that indicates teams that are more diverse actually have a 25 to 35% advantage in terms of profitability. And that's some research by, I think it was HBR, Harvard Business Review. So they've run the data, they've done the analysis, and they see that this diversity is a competitive advantage for the reasons you've mentioned. Diverse teams, they come from different backgrounds, they challenge each other more, they bring in differing ideas, and they're able to think of problems in a different way. However, as you correctly says, there are advantages if you just want to get started to having a homogeneous team, because there's less conflict. People typically think the same, but as you want to innovate and push further, you need to have that diversity, is what the reports have said. But one thing I do want to pull out is the fact that coming from a multicultural background or being a minority group within a majority environment, you do have to context switch. You need to be able to speak to different groups in different ways, and by default, you you have this notion of the world as being bigger and different people with different ways to interact with them. It's almost an emotional intelligence. Can you give examples from your career where you've used that skill when you've been in difficult situations, or you've been making innovative teams, or does it just come automatically?
Yeah, I think that how and where I grew up and forced me to context switch from the beginning. So I think that it becomes a part of who I am and more natural than calculated. So I see virtually my whole life, I've always been a minority in a majority context, and so that context, which was is automatic and comes by nature in my particular case.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely resonate with that. That makes a lot of sense for me. And then we did touch on diversity and inclusion in the corporate world. What do you think? What responsibility do businesses have, and how should they be thinking about increasing that diversity and inclusion? For instance, I'm on the fence about quota systems. For you, does that work, having a quota system, or does that create resentment and you got the job because you hit a number, or you needed to check a box?
Yeah, I'm against quotas in general. I think that, I think that, and being anti-quota is relatively controversial, especially in a U.S. Context. I'm much, there's kind of two types of equality. There's equality in result, equality in opportunity, and I'm for equality in opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is that everyone's different. Yeah. And I think so. If we can create an environment where there's equality and opportunity, those folks that work hard and do what they're supposed to and blah, 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 will be able to take advantage of those opportunities and succeed. The problem in large part with the other view, equality in result. It assumes that, it takes all of the personal initiative out. It gives everyone who wants to not go to school, not study, not do what they're supposed to, expect to get what others do. So I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know it's very controversial. I've been on a panel talking about diversity and inclusion. I took the stand that nobody wants the job because they check the box. If people are given equal opportunities, then we don't have this issue. The reality is people of color don't get those opportunities. People who are different, female leaders, don't get those opportunities to the extent where the homogenous group does, because people hire people like them, and typically that creates an inability to break into those circles.
But one thing you did say, the question that was the kickoff question was, what can managers or what can business do in this? And I think that those that understand the advantages of diversity and inclusion, will take advantage of them. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they take advantage of them, people don't like to think. People are copycats. Going back to that old football example, so one team gets a black football quarterback and wins the Super Bowl. What happens next year? 2 or 3 other teams now have black quarterbacks because they think that will win the Super Bowl. Now, so what happens? So now, 200%, 300% increase. So if we have a diverse group, or we have a female CEO, and that company starts doing well, then they say, hey, we need to get one. We need to get one too. It happened in IT, 10 years ago. Yahoo got, so Facebook has a female, female, she wasn't a CTO, but whatever she was at the top. And then Yahoo has to get one. And then, eBay had one, and so it goes in these waves. And so once you get these waves happening, okay, then it goes back to what we were saying in terms of normalization, because people see it as being normal to have women or minorities in these roles, and so then it becomes a little bit easier for the next person, and so the organization becomes more normalized. So what you have to do is you rely on the greed of people. You rely on the greed of people. People are very, very greedy. The finance people are very, very greedy, and they see money. Okay, and if one organization is having success because it's diverse, okay, there are going to be 10 other ones that try that tomorrow.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a lot of talk about the business case for diversity and inclusion. I think historically the focus has been on it's just morally right. Why aren't we doing it? Sadly, we live in a capitalistic world, but again, we got to play the hands that we are dealt. And I think there's an opportunity to frame diversity and inclusion within that context. Mm-hmm. So there is data to show those teams are more innovative, they're more successful, and they expand more rapidly. Just on your earlier point of bringing in the black quarterbacks or the female CEO, isn't there a potential tokenism that can happen? And where it's a little bit more of just sticking somebody in place because it worked elsewhere without truly understanding why we're doing it and having it as the fabric of what this organization does. Instead, it's just we'll put somebody in symbolically, but not look at the systemic issue.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah. There are tokens. I think most people who see themselves as tokens don't really want that, but the good ones take advantage of that and try to try to grow outside of the token model. Is the first person in every kind of position a token? Maybe yes, maybe no. Does it matter that much? I don't know. There's got to be somebody's got to be first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think within this community, the BLIX community, we have a lot of people who have been the first people in their position. And what we're trying to do is how do we codify that so we can lift up future aspiring leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually Kamala's mother told her that she was going to be the first in lots of things, but the key is don't be the last. And I think that's the thing. To try, be the first is okay, but just do a job so you're not the last.
Yeah. Just on that point, I think that's a great quote and a great point. How should we, as leaders who have been pioneers, or we are in a situation where we're the minority in the majority, how do we make it easier for more leaders or future leaders like us to come through?
Well, I think what you're doing here in terms of mentoring is the best way. To do it. You run into particular problems when you are trying to pull other people in your own organization up. I think you run into problems. But mentoring folks that are in other organizations, okay, and using your network to help those people, using your knowledge to help those folks, I think that's the way to do it. Lots and lots of people that have success, whether they be entrepreneurs, whether they be managers, whether they be politicians, have a guru or a mentor or whatnot. And I think that's part of the reason that we've not had the success in organizations, because we didn't have access to those mentors. Yes. And so now by creating this network and giving access to mentors, I think that's what you do. And you have to take this network and you really have to expand on it and take it even outside this network and make it a norm for women and people of color to have mentors.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm just conscious of time, Dr. Brown. Yep. I know that you've prepared some leadership lessons for us. Would it be possible to run through some of them?
I can certainly run through them, but it probably if you're going to do the leadership lessons of the group, then I should come at the end, because then I would bias the ones that the group comes up with. Or if you're going to skip that, then I can give mine. So it's up to the folks who are running it. I think someone is shaking their head.
Yeah, I think we can run this after we take on some questions, maybe, and take a group photo with everyone so that we just remember this remarkable day that I can see a lot of engagement in the chat box. So thank you so much, Dr. Brown and Carl, for hosting and sharing your insights. So just for everyone, if you guys can turn on your video, that would be amazing. We're going to take a group photo, and then we're going to have some questions that you feel free to ask them. And after which we can hear from Dr. Brown about his leadership lessons. So yeah, I'll count till 3 and then I'll take the picture. Perfect? 1, 2, and 3. Let me take it. Perfect. I think you all can hear the tick. So yeah, perfect. Now it's to you guys. So feel free, please, to ask any questions that you have. Thank you so much for the engagement that I can see in the chat. There is a lot of amazing points. If Dr. Brown, you would like to answer some of these things, or it wasn't a particular question, but there are thoughts that they shared with you. So feel free. It's up to you how you would like to take on this.
I think it might be best if you guys kind of not edited, but provided me with the questions here that I should answer.
Definitely. If anyone would like to ask a question for Dr. Brown directly, Mike, as always, first. So feel free, Mike, to go ahead.
Sorry, I'll start with saying thank you for sharing some fantastic insights there. And so it's an honor and as well as a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
I do have some specific questions. Would love to hear your thoughts when I actually have too many questions, so I'm going to pick one. Primarily around quotas, when you talked about, I think it was equal opportunities, what you termed.
Yep.
How would you have perhaps dealt with a situation, for example, like in South Africa, where at the end of apartheid, you had a group of a portion of the population that didn't have the same opportunities, and therefore, in terms of opening up the workplace, you could say, look, anybody can apply, but you need to have the skills. But if you had never had the opportunity to be tertiary educated, and there was a ban on tertiary education for a large portion of the community, I believe there needed to be some equitable actions there rather than purely equality. So it'll be useful to get your thoughts on that. And one question tied to that. Sadly, any talk on equality and racism is being linked to socialism right now. And that's sort of being poured over the top of that to try and sort of address some of those things. It'll be useful to hear your thoughts on how to counter some of those responses too.
The first one is, I think that I would say that I would be open to the argument that short-term quotas are necessary in some situations. Like the one you described, the access was non-existent. Can't even say it was unequal. It was non-existent. That if you needed to make some fast progress, then a quota system with a time limit is something that you might want to investigate. The problem with that is that it's possible as well that those folks that get those positions aren't really qualified for those positions. So so you need to make sure that the folks that get the positions are actually qualified, because if they're not, it's going to ruin it for years to come. So that's a quick one on the first one. The second one, in terms of socialism, it's interesting for me because, as I say, I'm always the minority of a minority of a minority. I've always been a Republican, and my father was a Republican. His grandfather was a Republican. And that while you might not know that all black people were Republican after Abraham Lincoln, and it continued to be so until the mid-'50s in the Eisenhower administration. Anyway, with that being aside, that doesn't mean I'm a Tea Partyist or a Trump person. I wanted to make that clear. But I think that it all depends on the level of the safety net. So I've lived in a socialist, with my relatively conservative views, I've lived in a socialist country now for 25 years. Okay? And so the question is safety net. It's what role do you believe the government has? What responsibility do you believe the government has in terms of providing for its citizenry? And so on one hand, you have kind of defense, internal and external defense. You have a stable monetary system. You may say education to a certain level. Okay, and then we get to healthcare, for example. Now, in the U.S. context, it's a problem. In Sweden, everyone does have healthcare. In the UK, everyone does have healthcare. So the question is, at what level do you want the social safety net to be? Do you want them to have education? Okay. To what level? Maybe university. Okay. And then you want them to have healthcare. Okay. You want healthcare, university, education, and then what else? So you as a country need to decide how high the social safety net needs to be, and then decide, is this something that you want to pay for? And then the question becomes, who is going to pay for it? And so I don't know exactly the question that you were wanted me to respond to. I think that certainly within the North American or the U.S. context, socialism is bad. But Social Security, is so sacred in the U.S. You can't even think about making any changes. And so that's certainly socialism. And so is public education and all sorts of things. Is socialism in the U.S. But you can't characterize that, because what happened in the 1950s was socialism was used to describe communism. And so when you think of, an American thinking of socialism is really thinking of communism, and that's the enemy. And so that's part of the problem. So you have to change the language that you're using and recouch it in a certain way. I don't think that answers your question, but that gives you some idea of what my thoughts are on it.
Thank you for that.
Great. I can see we have another question in the chat box saying, how can we have equal opportunity if some are from wealth families and some are from poor families?
How can we have equal okay? So when we're talking about equal opportunity, we're talking about equal opportunity from the institutions in the society. Okay.
I'm assuming this.
So what we're talking about is that the institutions that we have, the legal system and the police and government systems, that they treat everyone equally, and so we have equal access. The thing is, there are always going to be differences because people are different. And what I don't want and I don't like is when someone is successful, let's say financially successful, because he or her did his or her homework and studied and went to a good school and succeeded in society. That person is penalized or looked down on because he's had some success, because that person then has a responsibility as well to his or her family to put them in a situation where they have the opportunities that he or she may not have had. And so when you say that some people are poor and some people are not, that actually is the case. Some people are poor. Some people are poor because of structural things in society. Some things are poor because they didn't do their homework or didn't work or did things that they weren't supposed to. So not all poor people are the same. Not all rich people are the same, and it's very difficult to make statements that cover them all. So will successful people have different opportunities than those that are less financially successful? Yes. just like folks that live in London will have better opportunities than folks that live in someplace up in the north in a small town.
Great, thank you so much. So just to ask you, Dr. Brandt, so we have other questions. Would you have the time to take them on, or how does it work for you? Just because I'm aware that we went past the time for a long minute, so it should be up to you.
Yeah, I certainly do have the time to take a few more questions, and I do want to mention these takeaways. But since we kind of committed to an hour or so, I don't want the rest of the folks to drop off. So then we're just talking to ourselves. So somewhere you need to decide on what time you're going to end.
Great. Feel free to share your key takeaways with the rest of the group, since I'm aware that some of them have meetings, so they're going to be heading off. So feel free to do so, and then we can take questions.
Yeah, that might be a good way to do. So I have these takeaways as I was asked. The first one is there are good people out there in the world. Okay. But there are also bad people too. Okay. Sometimes people are brought up where everyone is good. Okay, and that would be nice if everyone is good. But if you just open your eyes and look at the news, you know that not everybody is good. Okay, but by the same token, there are lots of good people out there. So don't paint a brush that everybody is good or everybody is bad. There are good people and bad people. So that's the first one. The second is don't be a victim, or don't play the victim role. Okay. Yes, there's a context. Yes, we're in it. Yes, we may be have been dealt a bad hand, but okay, deal with it. Okay. Don't use that context as an excuse for everything. I didn't get this job because. Okay. I live in this neighborhood because. Okay. This happened because. Okay, so that's the second one. Don't play the victim. Don't be a victim. The third is success is attainable. Okay, now this doesn't mean that everybody is going to be successful, because it's a competitive world. And also, what do we mean by success? Okay, but success is attainable. It's something that real people actually have. Okay, and as long as you're a real person, you can have success as well. The fourth is having to do with people who have children. Okay, and we're thinking about your family, and that's prepare, don't poison. Prepare, don't poison. And what do I mean by that? Is that you need to prepare your children for the world. Okay, you need to prepare them for those bad people that exist out there. You need to prepare them for situations that they may come in contact with, okay, and how to deal with them, okay. But by the same token, you don't want to poison them. You don't want to say that. You don't want to scare them to think that everybody is bad, that there are no good people, that everybody's against them, okay. So you have to try to come up with a balance, preparing them to take on the challenges and the difficulties they may face in the world. But by the same time, you don't want to poison them to the world as well. So you got to work on this balance. And the final one is focus on what you have control over. Okay. Things are going to happen that are going to be outside of your control. Okay. So focus on the things that you actually can control. Okay, I mean, you can control, when you get up, what you put in your mouth, how much you exercise. You can control your response to situations. If someone says something negative to you, okay, you can react negatively, okay, or not. You are in control of these things. It's not easy, but you're in control of those things. And I think that over time, you have to learn how to really just focus on the things that you can change, and let the other things fall by the wayside. So focus on what you can change. And that's the 5. But one last kind of bonus one, excuse me, is try to identify what you're good at. Try to identify what you're good at, and then try to become better at that. You know, we can't be good at everything, okay? But everybody can be good at something. Okay? You can't be good at everything, but everybody can be good at something. Okay, so try different things. Try to think, be self-reflective, and find out what you're good at and what you'd like to do. And then fortify yourself through perhaps practice, training, additional education, and learn how to be the best you can at that. Okay, and then that leads to the success that you can attain if you're focusing on doing your best. If you're focusing on the things that you can change. And so all of these things kind of work together. So those are the 5 plus the bonus one that I wanted to mention real quick.
I think that's amazing. It's yeah. Sorry, Carl. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, John. It's fine.
No, I was just gonna say these are amazing tips. I'll just make sure to put it on my wall. It's really something that I'm sure everyone can relate to, even our aspiring leaders that are gonna become parents one day. I think that was I wrote like prepare, don't poison, because we do have siblings. We're leading the upcoming generation. So this is something that's very meaningful. So thank you so much, Dr. Brown. This is something very precious, and I'm sure everyone talk and this call, I really appreciate that. So yeah, I would love to end it here. I don't know if your time, and we can take 2 more questions if your time allows. And
so
everyone,
you take a look at the questions and come up with 2 questions that you think will be a good way to end.
If I didn't take someone's question, please do not take it personal. But okay, let me do that then.
I'm going to take one. It's Job Maline's point. So Job, he had to leave. He is one of the BLIX mentors. He grew up in South Africa. His parents obviously went through apartheid. He's managed to do very well for himself. He set up an amazing career in Accenture. He's run his own businesses, etc. What he says is, to your point, in South Africa, they implemented a reverse system that tried to counteract the years of advantage for white people. So what they did is they flipped it around, and then they had quota systems, and they pushed wealth back into the black community. Sadly, what has happened is a similar scenario where the black middle class see themselves as elite and aren't supporting the development and the taking forward of the poorer class. So we're seeing those same challenges again. So it's not based on racial lines, it's based actually on class lines, which is very similar to what you're discussing. And his question was, how do we change that? How do we build that accountability and responsibility? Not an easy one to answer.
No, it's not an easy one to answer. I mean, I think that oftentimes you have a pendulum, and the pendulum swings in one direction, and there's an overreaction on the other side. So my hope is that over time, that the pendulum would swing a little bit more to the middle. So long as, but the real solution to this, of course, is education. By educating everyone, especially those poorer or less advantaged folks, that education itself is the key to their future, because that education will give them access to positions and jobs and then income that will be able to help their families and their communities, and be able to integrate or infiltrate, however you want, either one, the middle class.
Yeah, and
so
it's very.
Go ahead. No. I was going to say it's education.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the core principles we have at BLIX, which is about that knowledge exchange through mentoring and through events and discussions like this. It is about that education and making ourselves available, those people who have succeeded, making ourselves available so that we create a rising tide of people like us.
So that's one more.
Okay, one more.
I'll make a quick comment on that education piece, which I think is really valuable. I totally agree with it. When Tony Blair did that, education as his policy, which was fantastic, we had a good increase in the number of educated people. But I think there's wholesale change that needs to be made, because what the hiring companies then did is said, we only hire from these 4 universities. And so, yes, you can be educated, which we saw a rise in the upskilling of the general population, but you still couldn't get in because you didn't go to these 4 universities, right? So there's still a filtering system that's at play. There's a great program that was on the BBC that said, will we see a black prime minister? And if you just look at the funnel that's been created, no matter what level of education you get, there's a certain path that you have to go through and that's the only entry point. So I think you're right, education, but we also have to make wholesale change in hiring processes, for example, and things like that. So
yeah, but to think about it is, if you have an open, a democratic, capitalistic system, the way that change is made is by firms outcompeting other firms. And if firm A has their employees, their CEO, CMO, CFO, CTO, and they come from London Community College, okay, and they're beating the pants off of the guys that came out of Oxford, okay, things will change. That's what will happen. You can't. You don't mandate. Say, okay. You don't mandate. You have to now accept more people, or increase the paths. You have to demonstrate that other paths are equally as good or better, and that will cause people to copy you.
And just to add to that point, I think that may still be the case that there is nepotism, or whatever you want to say, that people from certain schools will get certain jobs. However, if you create an increased baseline, there's still other opportunities that wouldn't have existed before. Probably doesn't need to be that pinnacle opportunity, but that will create opportunities for all. I'd love to have this discussion with you separate time, Mike.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. It's one that I'm nodding, but it's one of those that it's a discussion, and with the discussion.
So when you have that discussion, I'd love to join in as well. I also have some views on that as well.
We have to have a follow up discussion.
Can I just also ask a quick question, if I could just jump in? So you're, as you say, a minority within a minority of a minority.
Yeah.
A black Republican living in Sweden, which is a socialist country.
Yep.
I'm just really interested in sort of the framework of bringing all of that together, in terms of really that, you've got people from Africa, you've got people from Europe, you've got people from everywhere finding their way, and with your takeaways and things like that. So what would be your central message of the experience that you've had of these different environments and sort of succeeding? What would be your core? If there's one thing you would say to everybody, what would that be, please?
The one thing. It's hard to narrow it down to one thing, but I think if I had to do so, what you're asking me to do so, is really find out what you're really good at and hone those skills, so it becomes undeniable to anyone that you know what you're doing, that you're the man, that if they want this, they have to come to you. Or if you get a position, that you kill it. That's the only. I mean, you have to demonstrate that you're rather unique. You have to demonstrate that you are exceptional. You may have to demonstrate that you are irreplaceable. But certainly, you have to put yourself in a situation where you're undeniable.
Thank you.
it's interesting. It's similar to our previous speaker, Rene Carriol. He said, find your spike. Often we try and be great at everything, but there's always going to be that one spike that you, based on your background and your diversity and your context, will have that no one else can do as well as you. And it's about finding that. Just to echo your sentiments.
Thanks very much.
Right. So I'll bring this to an end now. I do apologize for the ones their questions weren't answered, but this is such an amazing engagement. It was actually the first talk that we received that much of a high engagement. So I can see the impact that this talk had in so many. So not further going into that, I will just ask Dr. Brown a few leadership questions, if your time allows. I hope that's okay with you, and then we can bring this to an end. So,
okay, go ahead.
The first question is, what is your biggest learning in leadership so far?
What is my biggest learning in leadership as well? Yeah, leadership is about a number of things, but it can be boiled down into kind of two things. One is establishing a vision, but the second and closely related one is the ability to persuade those around you to help you turn that vision into reality. So oftentimes leadership is seen as more about the vision, that this person had this vision, and vision was so great that all these people followed them. Okay, that rarely happens. It's the vision, okay, that's crafted in a certain way that certainly makes it attractive, but then the individual leader's ability to persuade those that this is valuable not only to the leader, but it's valuable to them. And if you can align your vision with the needs and desires of those people who you're trying to get to follow you, okay, and so you have this alignment between me as a follower. I know that this is important to me, so if I can work on this, okay, this is going to be helpful and add value to my life. But at the same time, you put all of those followers together, that it also furthers the cause, working towards the ultimate vision that the leader has crafted. So it's a combination of creating a vision and being persuasive.
Interesting. Yeah, that requires a lot of reflection. Since we have a lot of amazing leaders on the call, and it's quite interesting how each one have their quite definition of what leader means to them. So that was very insightful. Last but not least, what do you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
Yeah, that's interesting. I could say a lot of things. I could say that if I would have known that I was going to be spending 25 years in Sweden, I certainly would have done different. I would have prepared a little bit differently. That's one thing.
More winter clothing.
Yeah, and perhaps studying Swedish in college. What would I tell my younger self?
That's another way of phrasing it.
Yeah, it's that change is a constant, and that there are lots of unintended consequences.
What is your definition of unintended consequences? Like, what do you really mean by that?
Well, I mean, certain decisions that you make have fallout. I mean, have impact other things that you don't even think about. Yeah, I mean that's decisions. You're focusing on the decision in front of you, and you make that decision, okay, but you didn't realize that decision now impacted 3 or 4 other things that you weren't thinking about. And so just be aware that decisions and the decisions you make and the actions that you take, okay, have consequences that you don't necessarily know.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. No, thank you very much. That brings us to an end for our leadership lessons and for the talk today. It was super insightful. So thank you so much. I'll give it now to Carl, as I can see that he wants to say something. It's up to you, Carl, now.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that sentiment. It's so good to talk again, Dr. Brown. As a friend and as an expert, this has been brilliant, and we'll definitely tap you up again for more conversations. And you and I should absolutely keep in touch. I can't believe it's been 14 years. We had Shafiq on the call as well. Yeah. He's now the president of
Taiwan.
Yeah. So you put us on good paths.
There you go.
Just for the record, who was the top student? It was me, right? It wasn't.
This is a 14-year-old. This is a 14-year-old discussion. I was just telling my wife about this as well. Yeah.
we don't need an answer. It's been really brilliant talking again. Thank you so much for the insights. What we're going to do is we're going to encapsulate some of them into little video recordings, and we've interviewed you as well. We're going to put that on the website. So thank you for the influence you've had on me, on everyone on this call, and then those people who come to the BLIX community.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.